Welcome to Blue Compass, where we are talking about what Google Analytics 4 means for your websites. So for the last decade, Google has used an analytics platform called Universal Analytics on all websites. And this platform is now going away on July 1st, 2023. And they're moving to a platform called Google Analytics 4, or GA4, as we'll probably say a lot. And GA4 isn't just an upgrade, it's a totally new platform and a totally new experience. And so I have Jay and Katrina here today, two members of our digital marketing team, and we are going to break down what this means for your website. So Katrina, I wanted to start with you. Can you tell us what is Google Analytics 4 all about and why does this matter?
Absolutely. If anybody remembers the beta version of the web meets app version of Universal Analytics from a couple years ago, GA4 is essentially that. It is a very new version where Google Analytics makes it really easy to combine multiple web properties, app properties, any subdomains, anything that's related to your digital presence that you can track with analytics, you can now combine into a holistic analytics source. So there's a lot of really cool things that marketers can do when they can see the big picture of all of their marketing efforts together. But it's a little bit different from Universal Analytics because it really does focus on that user's journey through all of these entities. So instead of focusing on page views and focusing on single interactions with analytics like Universal Analytics did, this is giving you a really holistic look at how somebody's moving through all of your digital properties, what actions are they taking, and how valuable are they to your consumer journey.
Jay, Google Analytics, the current version, Universal Analytics, is going away on July 1st, 2023. Should website owners be concerned about that? Should they be implementing Google Analytics 4 right now, or is there time to wait?
Yeah, sooner is always better than later, especially when it comes to GA4. Anything where you need to collect historical data, it's valuable to have more of that than less, so you have something to compare to historically. But our current best practice is to have GA4 and Universal Analytics running in tandem up until that July 1st deadline when it stops collecting data. The other valuable deadline that we have currently right now, not to say that it won't change, but is the end of December. Universal Analytics will also purge all of that Universal Analytics data. So we are working internally and also giving recommendations to start exporting some of your Universal Analytics data, so you still have access to it. You can give comparisons to what you're seeing in GA4, but you may not have access to that anymore after that deadline.
Katrina, could you tell us, you touched on this briefly, but tell us a little bit about the differences in GA4 and the current Universal Analytics. And Jay, maybe you will chime in too, maybe you have some thoughts on it, but what are some of these differences and what are some of the good differences and not so good differences? Because there's definitely pluses and minuses with GA4.
Very much pluses and minuses with this. Some of our favorite differences is instead of focusing so much on those pages, we do see really cool user-based interactions. So one of those is engagement rate. Bounce rate, they just announced very recently, they are going to bring bounce rate into GA4. But before that, they were really focusing on moving people away from the bounce rate metric and into this engagement rate. So instead of focusing on somebody who left and didn't take an action, you get to focus on people who are on your website, how long did they interact. Diving into that a little bit further, bounce rate really measured, it didn't matter how long somebody was on your website if they left without taking an action. Engagement rate, on the other hand, gives you the ability to customize how long do you want somebody on your website. So if somebody stayed for 30 seconds, we can now see that, we can count that traffic even if they left. So that's one of our favorite differences so far with this. We also really like the ease of integration with events. So we don't need to be as heavily reliant on GTM to track user-based and page-based events.
Google Tag Manager.
Yes. Google Tag Manager. Thank you, Drew. So previously, if we wanted to see something outside of time on page and the average numbers, we really needed to implement some heavy coding through Google Tag Manager to get PDF downloads, to get form completions, click to call, anything like that we wanted to see page specifically, where GA4 has tried really hard to make that easier for marketers to just grab. It's the flip of a switch right now. We don't see 100% reliability with that, so we do rely on GTM for clients who are really focused on those metrics or maybe have more complicated setup to their website. But that we really love how easy they've made it for basic marketers.
Yeah.
I would say on the con side, some of them, I'm going to split this between some are cons, but they have some pros attached to them. The first one would be reporting. So Universal Analytics came with this huge, robust menu of reports that you had access to. Officially, there were 78. And then within GA4, you move that down to 19 core reports that you have access to from the very start. So you're, in theory, giving up a lot of pre-built information that you had access to. The benefit with that is that GA4 is much more customizable than Universal Analytics ever was. Even within the core reports, you're able to edit those, change which dimensions and metrics you have access to, even rename them and create your own folder structure within that. They call this collections within reports. So there's a lot more flexibility that's introduced there. The other main difference I would say on the con side is some of the ability to filter and manipulate the data that we had within Universal Analytics. Within Universal Analytics, we had the ability to filter or change URLs to all be lowercase to make sure we aren't looking at two versions of the same page and not aggregating that data together.
Right.
GA4 throws that out the window. You do not have the capability natively within GA4 to do that. So you end up having to look at things like page title. That's what they've really been pushing us to when it comes to URLs. Because you should have a unique page title for every page, and then it doesn't matter if you don't have the lowercase URL. But that has been a sticking point for us for a few clients.
Jay, in just a second, I'm going to ask you how hard it is to implement GA4 on a website. But first, if you would like to learn more about Google Analytics 4, we have an awesome 101 workshop set up. It's on September 1st at our office. It's in the West 48 Conference Center, and we would love for you to come and join us. You can check out this link to see details. Or if you don't have time or aren't able to attend, you can always reach out to us and we can help you implement Google Analytics 4 and get the most out of it on your website. Okay, Jay, is it easy to put Google Analytics 4 on a website?
The answer, as with most things, is it depends. It depends on what your current configuration is, how tech savvy you are, how much access you have within your CMS. But by most standards, actually getting the tag firing on your site is not any more difficult than it was within Universal Analytics. The part where it does get a little more challenging with GA4 is properly getting the tag set up and configured to capture the right data. So that is something that is a little more hands-on, a little more labor-intensive, a little more technical as you transition from Universal Analytics into GA4. A lot of that has to do with the filtering things we talked about before, the inability to do some of that, and a lot of your settings not migrating from Universal Analytics to GA4. A good example of that would be events and conversions. There's no native transition from your Universal Analytic events to GA4, and part of that is the way that they've restructured how those are fired and how they operate and how the data is captured within them. So all of that does make it a little more challenging to get up and running. But ultimately, there are a lot of benefits to having the proper setup from the beginning, which is why we have events like this U of Blue event.
Especially in Universal Analytics, we were able to set up multiple views. So you could have like a clean, a raw, test. There was a lot of ways to manipulate that data. And with GA4, you're set with one stream. So the importance of doing that cleanup, setting those best practices, IP filtering, for example, you have to get it right the first time because you don't have a backup source of data in this case. And there's no way to set that up without implementing a whole extra GA4, which would slow your website down.
Jay, what is the most awesome thing about GA4? And Katrina, what is the worst thing about GA4 that makes you sad?
You picked the right people.
I can't imagine why you chose us specifically for each
I was
of those.
really proud of how positive I was before.
You were
when
very,
you asked.
very
I did
positive.
a very
Yeah.
good job with that.
We took different roles
We
the
did.
first time. So.
Yeah.
The most positive thing, I would say, the flexibility within reporting and events. So the ability to have so much customization native to the tool, and be able to edit things and really make, not only for our teams internally, but also for the client, to see what's actually valuable to them without having to go to an external tool or to a custom report. You can see that right within a core report. And similarly with events, it makes it to where you don't have to also know a super technical tool like GTM and also get that implemented on your site. You can do a lot of it natively within GA4 if it's simple things that are based on page views or clicks. So that's something I've been really excited about from the start.
Nice. I'm now regretting the order in which I asked the questions because I would rather end on a positive note. But Katrina, end us on a sad note.
Maybe a positivity sandwich.
We can end with another positive.
Okay, that sounds good.
The biggest negative that we're seeing right now is that loss of reports, going from 78 reports where even if you weren't looking at them every day, they were collecting data, down to 19. That's a really big shift. And some key things that we took for granted are missing. So the connection to Google Ads. You can connect to Google Ads, but that data literally doesn't spit out anywhere until you create a new core report. So you have to go through the entire process of recreating all of that data that you are getting. Search Console, it doesn't immediately show up as a core report, so it's easier for people to forget that they need to make those connections and set those reports up. That's one thing that surprised us, especially because it is Google's tool still, and they normally want to make it really easy for you to integrate with their other products. So that's a negative that we're seeing and feeling. The other negative that I'm going to add is you can set up a ton of data. You can set up a bunch of fancy GTM. You can set up all of these events from the native GA4 event creator, but they don't always show up somewhere. And if you're not advanced enough to know that you have to go set up extra custom dimensions to collect that data, you've done such a good job of being proactive, you've done a really good job of being thoughtful about your website, but unfortunately you still won't have that data and it doesn't go historical at this point. So those are two of our big negatives. I'm ending with the third here because data retention. 14 months data retention. They've eased up on that requirement quite a bit. We get to keep page views, we get to keep users, sessions, that basic information longer than 14 months, which is awesome. But from a conversions and event-based perspective, anything that's tied directly to a user, we lose that after 14 months, and that makes it really hard to pull holistic reports. So if we're looking year over year, quarter over quarter, we don't have enough months in that 14-month window to pull that data. So it's going to be a lot more manual of exporting that information, utilizing things like Google Data Studios, Google Sheets, or other reporting platforms to compile that data.
To me, that was the most negative thing when I initially heard about that, is because right now in Google Universal Analytics, you can save data forever, for as long back as you have those analytics. And now for Google to limit that to 14 months, for people like us that love data, that are checking it all the time, that always want to look back and see how things have improved, that is not very exciting. But Google has to do it for legal reasons. That's one of the reasons why GA4 even exists, is because there's been lawsuits against Google and they're trying to limit their liability as much as possible.
Absolutely. One positive that we can end on.
Oh, good.
I got this.
I feel better. All right. It better be good.
Audiences. Google is making it really easy to create really fancy audiences within the Google Analytics 4 platform. So you can start to combine people who are converters, people who are taking secondary conversions, but maybe they didn't fill out your form. You can combine based off of page type, so based off of your products and services. They have a ton of custom functionality that you can integrate into audiences, and those are super easy to upload into the Google Ads platform, and it's really easy to use those for marketing. So that's one of my favorite things about the new platform, is that once you have the connections in place, you've taken the time to set those up, the ease of use across the board, and then that advanced functionality we're going to be able to use for remarketing is going to be really cool.
Well, hey, thank you for joining us today. And again, if we can help you with any Google Analytics 4 implementation or issues, don't hesitate to reach out to us. And we are having a workshop on September 1st in West Des Moines. We would love to see you there. Just visit this link to register. Thanks, and we'll talk to you next time.